I'm very passionate about this topic, and hopefully by the end of it you'll be as passionate and you'll switch advisors and come to me. Is that recording? Oh, oops. Shouldn't have started recording. But anyway. Okay, good. So we can get started. This is really going to break my neck at some point. Okay, so I have some show and share information. Okay, I'm going to start with 3 ounces of milk and 3 ounces of yogurt. Okay, milk, yogurt, solid, liquid. Okay, which one has more moisture content? Milk. You all agree? Raise your hand. Put your hand down. The same moisture content. Why? Yogurt and milk, the same moisture content. What happens? How do you make yogurt? You acidify. You have a culture, and then the casein, the protein in milk, one of the proteins in milk, they come together, they form a gel, not a coagulant. You'll hear me say this term often, a gel versus a coagulant. A gel is a 3-matrix structure that entraps water. So now you have a yogurt, which is a very weak form of a gel, but it's a gel, unless you see syneresis, where you have sometimes the water breaks out of the yogurt. But what you're doing is you're not evaporating any water, you are not straining any water, you just change the protein, acidifies, reaches an isoelectric point. You'll hear that a lot. Isoelectric point is the point or the pH at which the protein has no charge. So it will come together because no longer electrostatic interactions or repulsion, I should say. So they come together slowly, entrapping water and forming a gel, and that's your yogurt. The protein is in charge of that structure, that especially the casein protein. All right. So this is a piece of cheese, Helen. She knows what I'm talking about. You guys know. No. Okay, but it's cheese. It's not cultured cheese. It's pressed the way it's being pressed. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's a cheese. Okay, so yogurt and cheese, which one has more moisture content? Now you don't want to answer. Are you sure? No. Well, you are right. It's the yogurt. Because here what you're doing is you use a different mechanism, and here's is a coagulant, not a gel. So cheese is a coagulant. What happened here is you use an enzyme, and sometimes you use culture as well, in addition to the enzyme. So the enzyme breaks casein up, and we'll talk about that in more detail when we cover casein protein. And the casein, once it's broken up in a certain way, it comes together and fuse and coagulate and pushes the whey out. So then the whey comes out, and then you have the coagulant, which is your curd, and then you take that curd and process it differently for different cheeses. So obviously you have less moisture content in cheese. What about Greek yogurt? What is that? I don't have it. I remembered later. Oh, I could have put in some.
It's a fresh cheese.
Huh?
It's considered a fresh cheese.
Greek yogurt is actually the form of cheese, but it's not really cheese, because you take the yogurt and you strain it, and then you lose whey, and then it becomes the curdled casein. It's not really a cheese because it's not a coagulant, but it's really a curdled casein.
Yeah. Yogurt has fat as well, right?
Yogurt has fat. It depends where you start with. If you start with skim milk, then you will have a skim low-fat yogurt or skim yogurt.
Because the Greek yogurt, they say 0 fat. So
No, it depends. It depends. If they, well, I don't know how they process the Greek yogurt here, but If you start with skim milk, then yeah.
The same.
If you start with whole milk, depends on your starting material. Okay, so I made a dough yesterday. It just flattened out today. So I made a dough, just flour and water. What gives that dough this nice elasticity, we call it? You can mold it and it goes back in shape. You can extend it. Huh? Is there gluten in wheat? Are you sure? You're sure? No, there is no gluten. There are gluten-forming proteins. This is gluten. Ah. So gluten is that sticky elastic piece looking like a gum. Do you want to touch it? No? Okay. So basically what I did is I made the dough and then I let it rest and then I washed the starch out by water. I just did this under water and all the starch came out. And then what is left is this gooey material. This is gluten. Because when you knead the flour with water, you are forming the gluten. The gluten-forming proteins interact, form a viscoelastic matrix. That viscoelastic matrix is the gluten. And this gluten is responsible for the texture of the different types of bread. So here I have a loaf bread. What do we need in a loaf bread? This is not the greatest loaf volume, but you really need volume. So you want a very strong elastic gluten that will maintain shape. You don't want it to be extensible, you want it to be more elastic than extensible, so that it maintains a certain volume, hold the air, water evaporates and then you have CO2 and H2O vapor and then you form that loaf of bread. So you want really strong gluten-forming protein. Whereas in this type of bread, which we call flat bread or pita bread, in this type of bread, what you care for is extensibility. You don't want elasticity. Why? Because when you form the dough and you extend it, you sheet it. You don't want it to shrink. You just want it to remain a little bit extensible so it doesn't shrink and maintain the shape or the size of it. So you need not as elastic as the protein you need it to be elastic for a loaf forming bread. Okay? So different types of wheat varieties will give you different types of proteins, which we'll talk about under the Soy Protein lecture, which will tell you, okay, I want more elasticity, less viscosity or less extensibility for loaf. I want more extensibility for pita. So you will use different wheat varieties with different protein composition to get you the effect. So now, do I need any elasticity in cake? So look here. So here, there's no elasticity, not even extensibility. There's nothing. It breaks. You use flour obviously for cake, but what you care about in cake is really the emulsion formation, the gas holding property. So you don't really want as much of a gluten strength. You want the flour there for texture, but the egg proteins are more important here for the foaming and emulsification characteristics that you need in a dough better for cake. So different type of quality of flour and different proteins that you need for the cake, in particular compared to bread. Okay. I have Jello. I got one extra if anybody wants to eat the Jello. But this is a Jello. Hold on. Okay, yeah, it doesn't fall. All right. So, of course, you have protein in there. Okay, what type of protein usually is used? Gelatin. Now they're trying to use more plant proteins for that purpose, but mostly it's gelatin is produced. What percentage will give you this nice gel? Can you give a wild guess? Huh? What? What percentage?
1%.
No, why?
I don't know.
Anybody else?
0.5, 3%.
That's not my point. I want you to say 10 and I was going to say, no, it's 1%. Because I wanted to make the effect of just a little bit of a protein you need to form the gel. You busted my bubble.
No longer answer questions.
Huh?
I'm still impressed. I'm still impressed.
You're still impressed? I am too. I mean, 1% protein, you know, water, 99% water. No, well, you have sugar, but. Okay. Don't do that again.
Mike did it at the same time.
Okay, so you can tell I'm very passionate about protein and their function. We'll have a lot of examples to talk about in class, but this is just an overview of how different proteins function differently and bring different texture and function to the food. Okay. So, in terms of protein functionality, we categorize them into different functional properties. So throughout the semester, we're going to talk about different functional properties and how different structure impact different functionality, how different sources impact functionality, and how different processing impacts the structure and the function. But the main categories that you'll hear us talk about a lot is solubility, for applications such as beverages, protein concentrates, and shakes. So you want the protein to be soluble in order to incorporate a large amount. If it's not soluble, it's going to precipitate out. You don't want that. You don't like that. Water holding capacity. So this is important in the meat industry because if you want to sell meat at a lower or lower cost and more profit, you want to sell water along with it. So you want to make sure you have a meat patty that the water does not get lost, whether during cooking or during sitting out. So you want to add to a beef patty, let's say you will add some manufactured whey protein to enhance water retention so that you have more weight to sell for less cost. It's also important in cheeses and yogurt. You don't want yogurt to cinerise. It doesn't look good. You want to make sure that the water retains in your structure. Gelation also, some products are purely a gel, like tofu, for example, is a gel. So the manufacture of tofu is based on the protein forming a gel to give you that particular texture. A lot of application are important in terms of using the protein as emulsifying agents and foaming agents. So emulsifying mayonnaise, salad dressing, gravies, ice cream, you need that protein to emulsify to keep the aqueous and the lipid fraction mixed together and not separated. So in mayonnaise, for example, the egg protein provides that. And then foaming, a lot of application requires the foaming capability, and these are listed here. Some food applications require both emulsification and foaming, but such ice cream, for example, you have a foam and you have an emulsion in that system. Okay, so throughout the semester we'll look at different properties and characteristics of the protein and what makes a protein highly soluble, what makes it lose its solubility, what makes a protein a good emulsifier, what makes a protein a good gelling agent, and so on, and how that is impacted by different factors. So, knowledge check. I always like to have these knowledge checks to see where we are at. Some of you is just a review, some of you is probably this is new information. Okay. So protein functionality in food systems can be affected by, and I don't expect you to know this. Don't be shy if you answer incorrectly, but this, again, think about it as discussing, learning new things, and gaining participation points. Alright, so, any wild guess? Okay,
All of the above.
all of the above. What were you going to say, Sophie or Sophia?
Sophie.
Okay.
I'm not sure about C, so I'll guess A and B.
So you're not sure about C, but you're guessing B?
I'm guessing A and B.
Ah, A and B. Okay. So what is the R group of the amino acid? Just remember a little bit your chemistry background and food chemistry. So what's R group? The side chain. Okay. So an amino acid is a building block of protein. You have an amine group, you have the carboxyl group, you have a hydrogen group, and then you have the side chain, which is the R group. The side chain can be different between different amino acids. So depending on the side chain, you might have an extra charge. You might have a hydrophobic amino acid if you have a long hydrocarbon chain, for example. You may have a reactive group, such as a thiol group. A thiol group is your SH group here. So here your R group in the case of cysteine, which is one amino acid, the R group here is your SH2HS. That's your R group. So the R group contains a sulfidyl group, and we're going to talk about the importance of this sulfidyl group in different applications. Why it's important, it's reactive. And when it reacts with another sulfidyl group, it gets oxidized and form a disulfide linkage. We're going to talk about why is that important in different applications. So denaturation of the protein is anything that causes a physical change in the protein structure. It could be a change in the quaternary structure, tertiary structure, secondary structure, or primary structure. And I'm going to talk about all these structures later. Any physical change in the native form of the protein is a denaturation. And when the protein denatures, it's going to change its structure, and when the structure is different, the function will be different. And it could be detrimental, it could be beneficial in certain applications. So it depends on your final application. So yes, all of the above would be the correct answer for this one. Okay, the following is always true. A good emulsifier is a good foaming agent. A protein that forms a strong gel is also a good emulsifier. A protein with low surface hydrophobicity is a good emulsifier. Again, wild guess. Yes?
I think C.
You think C? Okay, any other answers? No? Guess? Okay, what am I talking about? So what is an emulsifier versus a foaming agent? An emulsifier, what does it do? It makes sure that you have a stable system where you have water and fat or oil or lipid. So that's an emulsifier. Foaming is a stable system of air and aqueous, and sometimes you have fat too. So a gel, we know, gel is you form a 3D matrix where the protein interact and entraps water. And then the protein with low surface hydrophobicity. What is a hydrophobicity? So hydrophobicity is the not liking of water, basically. So, and surface, we will learn that protein is a very complex structure. So there is a surface property and there are interior property of the protein. So proteins are large molecules, they fold and turn and they form a structure. So there is the surface part of that structure and there's the interior part of that structure. So the surface part, if you have low surface hydrophobicity, then you don't have groups that like lipid, for example. You will have less of that. So if you have low surface hydrophobicity, and then your surface is not active, okay? So that means not active with a lipid component. So no, you won't get a good emulsifier if you have low surface hydrophobicity. So basically, what is the answer to this? None of them. Because especially always, there's this always. There's not one protein that is good in everything. And although you might think that emulsification and foaming is similar, you have surface activity, sometimes, yeah, a good emulsifier can be good foam, but you have still different mechanism going on. So not every protein that emulsifies well is also a good foam. And obviously not a good emulsifier will not form a strong gel. Meat proteins are not great emulsifiers, but they are excellent gel.
So a question, if protein with high surface hydrophobicity, then it would be a good emulsifier because it enhances the protein to open up?
Not opening up yet. So you might have a low surface hydrophobicity protein, you denature it, opens up, has higher surface hydrophobicity now when it's denatured.
It doesn't really matter, like what's the link between, is there like a specific link between the hydrophobicity and emulsifying, or no?
Well, we are going to have 2 lectures on emulsification probably too, or on functionality in general. But what I wanted to say is later on I was going to explain the balance that you need. So you need to have, if the protein is very hydrophobic on the surface, it won't be a good emulsifier either, because it won't interact with the water.
So it's a balance.
You need a balance. It's all about balance. Yep. But it's a good question. You're ahead of the game. This is just introduction. All right. So what is the main role of proteins in food?
Nutrition value? Oh, is it like the functionality or what is it supply?
You tell me. What's the most important role?
Nutrition value, like for us, no? Yeah, muscle.
This is how I look. I'm just hiding my mind. I love proteins, so. This is what I eat every day now. But seriously, one of the contributions of protein is bodybuilding. But yeah, I don't have that much of that. But other than bodybuilding, we have nutritional contributions of the protein. So the nutrition contribution is a function of protein quality and quantity. So what do I mean by protein quality? What I mean by protein quality, it's twofold. One fold is the essential amino acids. Most of you know essential amino acids are amino acids that our body cannot produce. And there is 8 of those, and sometimes it's 9, depending if you consider histidine as an essential amino acid, depending on the age group. So you have essential amino acids, and that's what makes a protein. If you have all of them in adequate amount, then it becomes what we call it a complete protein. So you have all essential amino acids, you don't have any limiting amino acid. That means you don't have amino acid that is essential and present in a low concentration. And there is a specific daily requirement of a protein per day, and this is 50 grams a day, or 1 gram of protein per 1 kilogram of body weight. So we need a certain amount of protein per day for general body functions. And another, this is showing you a supplement fact where you have a protein, 36 grams in a serving. This is really high protein percentage. And if this is a claim that it's high protein supplement, you'll see on the nutrition label the percent daily value. So this is providing 70% of the daily value, which is 36 grams by 50 is about 70%. In one serving, so this is really high. So, but apart from the essential amino acids and the amount of the protein, it doesn't matter if you consume that amount, but you can't digest it. Because some proteins are not as easily digestible as other proteins. For example, plant proteins are not easily digestible compared to animal proteins. So you have the casein protein, you have the meat protein, they are very accessible to digestive enzymes, whereas soy protein might not be as much. And we're going to dive into that in later lectures, but basically ease of digestion is very important. For example, whey protein, although it is animal source protein, it's a very compact and globular structure protein. So kids or babies, infants, they cannot digest whey protein as well as adults because their digestive system is not as developed. So they don't have as much enzymes and bile and what have you to open up that protein and digest it. So a lot of infant formula, they don't use whey protein, they use whey protein hydrolysate as supplement. So they hydrolyze, break down the protein for the infants. So this value here, the percent daily value, takes into account not only the quantity but also the digestibility of the protein. So, and this value is usually determined when you do PDCAS. PDCAS stands for, anybody remembers what PDCAS? Huh?
Corrected amino acid score.
Wonderful. Protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. So this is a value you take into account quantity, digestibility, and the primary limiting amino acid to get that. And we will cover that in a different lecture. Okay. So quantity is important, quality and quantity, and usually quantity for nutrition label is determined by based on nitrogen content. Most commonly to be Keldar. Now they do do mass, not necessarily by eco, by a nitrogen analyzer. But the caveat of that is that it's a crude protein content method. It measures all nitrogen and converts that to protein using a conversion factor, which is based on the percentage of nitrogen a certain protein has. And the percentage of nitrogen a certain protein has depends on the amino acid composition, because different amino acids will have different amount of nitrogen. So a factor is generated based on the percent nitrogen. Like this is an example of glycine has higher percent nitrogen than tyrosine, just because glycine is a smaller amino acid anyway. The R group of glycine is H, whereas tyrosine is a larger amino acid, so the nitrogen, and it doesn't have an extra amine group, as one amine group over a large amino acid structure, it becomes percent nitrogen becomes too small. That in addition to amino acids that are basic, where you have arginine, histidine, glycine, we'll talk about that later. So you have different percentages of nitrogen, but like I said, the caveat of that is not all nitrogen in food is from protein. What other sources of nitrogen can be in protein, in food? Can you think of other sources?
I don't know if this has nitrogen in it. Does B12 have nitrogen?
Yeah, vitamins. Some vitamins do have nitrogen in them. Yeah, B12 is one. Okay. So yes, some vitamins have nitrogen. You might have nucleic acids in your food, urea, let's see, free amino acids and peptides, they're not considered proteins, but they contribute to the total protein because they have nitrogen. And melamine. You all know the story of melamine, right? Do you know the story of melamine? Aha, so some of you don't know the story of melamine, that's why I'm going to tell the story of melamine. Okay, so melamine is a chemical that is used in ceramics. It's not for food. But look at its composition, how many amine groups it has, and the amount of total nitrogen it has. And in Keldar, really, you cannot differentiate between nitrogen and amine groups. They're all nitrogen. So contamination, adulteration of baby formulas, adulteration started actually with pet food. So pet food needed to have a certain amount of protein in it, certain level of gluten proteins in it. So instead of putting the exact amount of protein that is required for that pet food, they supplemented with melamine. So when you run the Keldar, you will get a certain amount of protein, similar to what the regulation is, or what is required. So the intent was, economical gain. But the intent was not to kill all of these pets that died in the process, because it turned out that this causes kidney problems and death. So it started with pet. It was also put in infant formula, the same reason, economic cost, to boost the amount of protein without adding as much protein as they should have. So it got discovered after incidences of that. It got discovered, but the actual method of detecting protein did not detect melamine. So there are different methods to detect melamine, and this is a spectroscopy method, a liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry method in order to determine presence of melamine. Okay. Alright, so other than nutritional, there are physiological functions. So you hear that, oh, proteins are good for me, I feel more satiety when I eat protein. Or even this FDA approved a claim in 1999, and after that claim, a lot of people wanted to put soy protein in their food products because of this claim. It says 25 grams of soy protein a day as part of a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease. How do you come about such a claim? So a lot of human studies research over the years that, clinical trials to show the association of soy protein with lower risk of heart disease. With a lot of different studies, they finally said, okay, so there is an association, FDA put a stamp on it, and after that there was a boost in using soy protein in different ingredients. This is an example of a nutrition bar, a protein bar, where they use soy protein blend. In addition to that, physiological contribution is related to bioactive peptides. So when you chop up the proteins into pieces, these pieces are called peptides. So whether you chop them up in the body by digestion or by hydrolysis outside of the body and forming an ingredient that is hydrolyzed, you may generate peptides or sequences that are bioactive. That means they have physiological function. Physiological functions such as reduction of hypertension, antidepressant, promote satiety, and others. Antioxidant is another one. In case of soy protein specifically, they are associated with a category of components, plant components called isoflavones, which are phytochemicals. They're called phytochemicals because they are phyto from plant material, and sometimes they call them phytoestrogen because they simulate estrogen hormone function in the body. And a lot of research have shown positive health contributions, and of course there are contradictory research that showed negative. But a lot of buzz was around isoflavones a decade or 2 decades ago, saying that they are great for you. So soy protein again became very famous in that regard. Protein and isoflavones. And they are associated with the protein because if you look at them, there are components that have ring structure, phenolic groups, they're hydrophobic. So they associate with the hydrophobic moiety of the protein or the structure of the protein that is hydrophobic. That's why they call them associated with the protein because of their hydrophobicity. They don't like water, so they will hide with the protein. So when you consume your protein, you're consuming them as well. Okay. Do you like to have 5 minutes break? Or would you like to continue? It's up to you guys. We can have 5 minutes break every 50 minutes. Every 50 minutes. How many 50 minutes are there? After the first 50 minutes. Break? Yeah. Take 5 and come back. 5, not 6 or 7. Okay. Anybody wants cake? Well, please. No? This is jealous. So, I'm not sure I'm able to
I couldn't remember where it was. Alright, I downloaded everything. I'll use it. Yeah. And then stop.
No, if you want. Well, actually, you would encourage.
Oh, right over there. Write that on your. still trying to figure out, like Wednesdays I think I probably, the most likely day that I would stay is Friday. But, I mean, usually if I'm here, I'm running these roads, it's not going to be class.
Yeah.
So,
Because right now there's
take over
there's not
away.
really a desk.
You might as well use it.
Yeah.
It's done. No, I was at MRGC.
And then are
Yeah.
you, how often do you make labs?
Seafoam breed. I need to talk to my manager. I will be there on Monday.
Oh.
I'll be there on Monday for sure, and then once we have the schedule figured out, I'll be there for sure with her Irish as well. And then kind of like just try to figure out the number that I can come to. So not like last semester. I can tell you that, I know for sure. So
Yeah.
first, you eat your snack first. And then you're hungry later.
I was wondering if you got all that.
In Gordon?
Well, points.
Oh, you're in Mexico?
Last week.
Oh, really?
Was it last week? Yeah.
Everybody was somewhere else. I think so.
Sad.
And it did. Okay. Alright. Dustin wasn't on Aruba. Yeah, no.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, usually I park in there because a lot of times that's where I'll be from. Like I'll go back to where I'm at because you've been there, right? So that's usually where I hide out. Yeah.
Oh, she's going, she's working.
Yeah. Yeah, because you were at my house where Party, I recognize them. Yeah, if you go, because you took Como, if you take the next exit, that's where I live. So I live just off that exit. That's the unfortunate. You can come hang out when you're like frigid or they're like toasty. You can come hang out with me. I'll make you one.
Is that like a double lunch too?
If you are not allergic to cashew.
Oh, okay.
Are you scared or allergic? How allergic?
A lecture and a half.
What is this? I can put it in my room. Our lectures. I'll vacuum. I vacuum every week.
I still have to.
Okay. We can get going again. Did we lose anybody? No? Okay. Good. We can't afford to lose anybody in this class. Okay. All right. So moving on from nutritional and physiological and muscle building, the main focus of this class is going to be about functionality or physical functionality in food systems. So we're going to talk about general and then later on more specifics. So from the physical side of things, so first we have the color aspect. So some proteins give are the color giver of a certain matrix. For example, they are light scattering, such as casein micelle, so it gives you this unique white color of your curd or milk, and then yogurt, and then the cheese curd. So cheese is not yellow, that is a lie. So, right, I'm not. What's the color? College board question. Come on. Okay. They are chromophore, so they absorb light, such as myoglobin in meat, betalins in red beets, so they give you that red color. And they are responsible for browning. So non-enzymatic browning, can you give an example of that?
Caramelization.
How is that protein related. It's not enzymatic though. Maillard, yeah. So Maillard browning, such as this beautiful brown color in bread, and Maillard browning, we'll talk about that again another time, is when you have an amine group interact with the reducing sugar. So you have the shift base formation, and then you will have the propagation of the reaction, and then you get the brown pigments at the end of the reaction. Enzymatic. Can you give an example? Yeah, what causes the browning of apples? Polyphenol oxidase. So again, enzymes are proteins. So enzymatic, meaning reaction based on some sort of protein involvement. In this case would be the enzyme itself. And then you have the browning of an apple due to polyphenol oxidase, which is an enzyme. And then sometimes it's not desirable. Other times it's desirable, like tea, browning of tea. You want that phenomena. Flavor. So from flavor perspective, also protein contribute to flavor. So you have the bitter taste that comes from hydrophobic amino acids. So sometimes when you chop up the protein and then you expose hydrophobic components, then you'll get the bitter note. Acidic note is when you have a lot of acidic amino acid in that protein, gives you a sour taste. Cysteine, a sulfur taste. When you have a protein high in cysteine, that will give you a sulfur taste. Glutamate, monosodium glutamate is it has an amine group. It's a glutamic acid basically with a salt. So this gives you the umami flavor, savory flavor. The proteolysis gives you the unique flavor of ripened cheese. So you have the fermentation going on, aging of the cheese, proteases are produced, and then these proteases break down proteins, give you peptides, and give you the unique taste of a ripened cheese. Sweetness, such as aspartame, which is a dipeptide, phenylalanine and aspartic acid combined will give you that dipeptide. That means di is 2 amino acid and 1 peptide linkage is a sweetener, as you all know. So you have contribution to color, you have contribution of flavor, but the biggest of them all is the contribution to texture. Again, I listed some of the functionalities in one of the earlier slides, but here they are. You have the water binding and gelation, coagulation. So water binding is important in gel, and it's also important to retain the water that the gel interacts, whether it is a yogurt or whether it's a meat product or whether it is a tofu or a jelly. Emulsifying and foaming. Ice cream is both a system of emulsification and foam. This is also emulsification and foam. You have salad dressing, like I said earlier. Mayonnaise is emulsifying. Viscosity and elasticity, where you have that in the bread. You want more elasticity, more viscosity, extensibility, depending on the type of baked product you want. So what gives all of this different structures? Proteins, yes, but how? So either through protein-protein interaction, protein-water interaction, protein-lipid interaction, protein-air interaction, protein-sugar interaction. So it's a bunch of interactions that leads to these different types of structure, texture. So all of these chemical and physical interactions, sometimes it's chemical because bonds are formed, sometimes it's just association, it's physical. So all of these interactions are via different types of bonding or interaction. You have ionic, hydrogen bonding, hydrophobic, covalent, and thus different forms of structures are formed. Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not sorry.
Why? You can join us. We need more students. Maybe not. Okay. So different forms form of interactions, therefore you get different structures. And again, the whole class is on this, so that you know, in one slide. Okay. So, anti-nutritional factor. I mean, proteins are great, but I have only one slide on anti-nutritional factor. Just summarize it in one slide and expanded the whole positives in entire semester. But you know, everything has their negatives. Enzyme inhibitors. Enzyme inhibitors are proteins. So some examples, prominent examples, are protease inhibitors. The most common one that you might have heard of is trypsin inhibitor found in legume, and most specifically soy. So soy protein or soy product needs to be processed in such a way to inhibit 90% of trypsin inhibitor activity. Otherwise, it won't pass. Because if you have trypsin inhibitor, then this will interfere with the digestion of trypsin in your body, and your proteins in the body will not be digested, and then you have malabsorption. So you don't want that. Another one is amylase inhibitor, is also present in cereals. This also inhibits amylase, and amylase is another digestive enzyme for starch. You don't want it to be inhibited for digestive reasons.
Just so it's the inhibitor?
Is a protein.
It's
Yeah. Yeah, this is example of a protein that is we don't like. I don't admit it too much, but we don't like it. Yeah, because it will inhibit the digestion or interfere with our digestion.
Overall, with other components, it's not just the protein that it's not going to.
No, if the inhibitor is present, protease inhibitor, it will inhibit trypsin.
The protein.
The trypsin,
work.
the trypsin is one of
Now I
the
got it. Okay.
enzymes that digest protein. If it inhibits, our protein is gonna go away without being digested.
Sorry, yeah.
Go away. Alright, so another problem, which is the big deal right now, and it's the major, one of the biggest, if not the biggest recall problem, is allergenic protein. So, so when I say recall, that means if a protein made it into a product that is not supposed to be there due to contamination and was not put on the label, then a major recall happens, and that's a huge loss for the company. So there are regulations on labeling proteins, and if it's not labeled, that is a big deal. Sometimes also the ingredients are hidden ingredients. So there are ingredients that are given a certain name, but these ingredients come from a source that might be contaminated with a certain type of protein, and it's not put on the label, and then that becomes a problem. So they call them Big 8. I didn't list the Big 8, I just listed the main ones that are used as ingredients. But the Big 8 include these 5, as well as fish, shellfish, and tree nuts. Yeah. So fish, shellfish, and tree nuts are not included here because I just included those that we use commonly as ingredients in food applications. So they call them Big 8. Does anybody know why they're called Big 8? Why are they called the Big 8?
Most commonly allergenic. They make up, what, 90%
Mhm.
of the allergies?
So they call them Big 8 because 90% of the outbreak or allergy is attributed to these proteins. Obviously, some people are allergic to strawberries, so proteins in strawberries, for example. Somebody said they're allergic to cockroaches.
That's Sprin.
Wouldn't that be like shellfish?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Skeleton, exoskeleton beings.
It's like the red food coloring, yeah.
Yeah.
Shellfish.
Yeah, so there is a difference also between sensitivity, food sensitivity, and food allergy. Food allergy is really associated with protein allergic responses by immunoreaction, in an immunoreaction response due to presence of protein. Whereas food sensitivity could be like lactose intolerance or sulfite sensitivity, where people get asthma from sulfite or something. That's different. That's not an immune reaction. Toxic compounds, unfortunately, are formed, but these are, like, for example, the first one is a byproduct kind of from proteins. So some amino acids are precursors to toxins. such as the nitroso compounds, nitrosoamines. So if you have nitrite in cured meat, so nitrite will interact with amine groups from proteins and form nitrosoamines upon heating, such as cooking bacon, for example, can result in production of nitrosoamines. Another one is hydrocyclic amines. When you roast your beef and you roast it too much, and then your elastin, the protein in meat, will also form through Maillard reaction, actually forms heterocyclic amines. Lectins, these are proteins present in seeds and some green beans as well. These are proteins, and upon consumption of raw seeds or raw beans, a lot of it might cause inflammation in the intestinal tract and hemorrhage, so it's not a good protein. Others evident, for example, is a protein found in eggs. It binds biotin, a vitamin, and render it biologically unavailable. So if you have a deficiency in biotin, don't eat a lot of eggs with it, with a food source that is rich in biotin, or take supplements. Histamine is found in fish or old fish, actually, because you have the histidine, which is an amino acid, can undergo decarboxylation, loss of CO2, and then the histidine becomes histamine. And there's also tyramine, is another amino acid. Tyrosine can become tyramine under the same reaction. But histamine is a vasoconstrictive amine. That means cause, again, asthma attack, kind of an asthma attack. Yeah. That's why you hear take antihistamine if you have an allergic reaction, because the body produces histamine upon another stimulant. Okay. That's it for anti-nutritional factors. Moving on to the good stuff. So you're going to see this slide a lot, and you're going to get sick of it, and at the end you're going to love it because it's going to put everything together like a puzzle. You start piece by piece building the puzzle. So again, you're hearing today a lot of terms, but these are just introduction, and we'll go over each term, slice it, and spend a few lectures on it. But this is an overview again. So this is a slide that's going to summarize the entire class. So how do we relate protein structure to function? And what would that structure-function relationship, how would it impact food product? So we have protein structure and we have protein function. So we're going to talk about factors that impact protein structure. So we have intrinsic factors. That means intrinsic, I don't know what other words of intrinsic is, but factors that are present already in the protein, and that would be due to the protein source. And I have that in green because there will be a whole section on different protein sources from different, like milk, soy, cereal, meat, etc., egg. The intrinsic factors, however, include key factors, so composition. When I say composition, I mean amino acid composition. What's the percentage of glycine versus proline versus lysine, etc. So the amino acid composition, because the composition impacts total hydrophobicity, it impacts charge, it impacts the molecular structure of that protein. It has a major impact on multiple other factors. So we start with composition. Next to composition is not how much protein you have, how much histidine you have, and arginine and all of that. Where are they in the sequence? So I have, from the N-terminus, I have all hydrophobic amino acids, and then I have all hydrophilic amino acid. Then I'm forming something called an amphiphilic protein, a very amphiphilic protein. I mean, half of it is hydrophobic, half of it is hydrophilic. That's axillate emulsified. Okay, so the sequence is important. how many ionizable and reactive groups does that protein have? Do we have high amount of free sulfide groups, SH groups? That means that you are prone to polymerization or forming large polymer due inter-disulfide linkages. Do I have hydroxyl groups that are ionizable at high pH, that impact the charge, impact the solubility? Do I have high amount of acidic amino acid, high amount of basic amino acid, also impact total charge, impacts how soluble the protein can be, and impacts the total hydrophobicity or the dislike of water. Conformation. What is conformation? Yeah, or in other words, you hear me say molecular configuration. So molecular configuration or conformation of the protein is the final structure of that protein. So it is based on the composition of the protein, the sequence, the charge, how does the protein fold, and how does this final structure of that protein. And that final structure impacts a lot of different functionality. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail later. Molecular interactions. You hear me say, again, I'm introducing terms, don't freak out. All of these will be repeated. Molecular interactions. By molecular interactions, I mean intermolecular interaction or intramolecular interaction. Does anybody know the difference between inter and intra?
So intra is within the protein,
Mm.
and then inter is the other one.
Yeah.
Would be with other proteins or other structures.
Very good. Where did you learn that?
Just for example, like interstate and intramurals.
Yes, so I'm going to repeat what Myson said. So the protein is a large molecule, so they have a lot of groups within the protein. They're going to interact with each other. And when they interact with each other, they're going to form a secondary structure, they're going to form a tertiary structure. That is intramolecular interactions. And then you have the inter, between another protein or sugar or fat or water, so with something other than that protein. So native here, these intrinsic factors dictate how the native structure of the protein is. Native, that means not modified, as is, as God created it. So native. And then from there, you have a whole list of factors. This is just a small list, the short list. Okay, extrinsic factors is everything else outside of that native protein. So, see, God's influence, human influence. Okay, so extrinsic factors, so we have the environment that the protein is put in. So what's the pH of the system? What's the temperature of the system? What's the amount of salt you have in the system? That's going to impact the charge of the protein, the structure of the protein, and the interaction that protein has intra and inter. Processing and handling. Boy, there are so many different processing and handling. So there's the drying. If we are producing a protein ingredient, there's a drying step. So how is that drying step going to impact my protein? Or if we are formulating with the protein, we're heating it. We're producing a beverage. We're putting the protein and then we're pasteurizing it. What happens? So then we're extracting the protein from a complex food matrix to create an ingredient. How are we extracting it? What conditions? Are we using salt? Are we using alcohol? Are we using basic solution? What are we using? Are we using heat? So that will all impact all of these factors. Storage, how are we storing it? What's the humidity level? What's the temperature during storage? How long are we storing it? And then, of course, this is the fun part. How do we modify the protein to make it better or worse? What caused protein to change in structure? We broke down the primary structure. We hydrolyzed it, broke the protein. Chemical modification, we added a functional group. Physical modification, we added high pressure. Natural reactions, Maillard reaction, Maillard glycation. Biotechnology, we interfered with God's will. We changed the genetics. So, native goes to denatured and modified. So adding these extrinsic factors will denature the protein or modify the protein, and by doing so will impact the protein functionality. So going from negative to denatured or modified, functionality changes. And functional properties, again, I categorize them into organoleptic, that means the sensory attributes, so taste, aroma, color, the hydration aspect, interaction with water, solubility, water holding, water binding is another one. And then surface properties, interaction with lipid and emulsification, interaction with air and foaming. And then there are the structure, the viscosity, the gelation, the viscoelasticity. So each category will be covered in detail later on. But so going from native to denatured modified, the protein structure changes, protein function changes. And sometimes we want to change in structure to impact a certain function. For example, whey protein is not a good emulsifier as is. It doesn't have good surface hydrophobicity. We denature it a little bit, open up the structure, we expose more hydrophobic groups, then the emulsification capacity is enhanced. Caseins are natural emulsifiers, we call them, because they already have an open structure and an excellent balance of hydrophobic to hydrophilic. So sometimes you want to impart this change to improve a certain functionality, sometimes you do not want to, you want to avoid a change. And here's a definition of a protein functionality as an FYI. It says any viscochemical property that affects processing or is affected by processing, and it affects behavior of the food system, and the behavior is judged by quality attributes of the final product. What's the final structure, texture, color, taste, consistency, a lot of different quality attributes. Okay, memorize this slide. You will actually by the end of the semester know the slide very well. At the end of the semester, you'll be able to answer these questions very well. Somebody in this room might already know, but we're not going to have them answer. Okay, so let's think about this. The soft drink manufacturer wishes to fortify their beverage with protein. This is kind of the dream of everybody right now. The pH of their beverage is typically pH 2.5 to 3. Which dairy protein would you recommend they work with and why? I'm giving you a hint. Let's say dairy protein. Now you might not know this, but we will know by the end of the semester which dairy protein we will pick. Yeah, what? Huh?
I'm assuming it's solubility in low pH.
Yes, so that is a good assumption. And they actually call it the golden protein for beverages. It's called the golden protein for the golden child, kinda, because it is a very hydrophilic protein on the surface.
Which protein?
Whey protein.
Whey.
Yeah. So it's very hydrophilic, and not only that, at pH 2.5 and 3, it remains clear. But that's the beauty. It doesn't have, you don't have to mask the turbidity by adding a color or chocolate flavor or strawberry flavor. It just, if you want a clear beverage, you can form a clear beverage with whey. I had a example to show you, but I left it in the office. Next time. But anyway, it's a clear beverage, and a lot of the consumer actually like clear beverages. So in order to give a consumer the high protein that they are demanding, whether they are athletes or just health conscientious, they will seek a clear beverage that is high in whey protein.
And how high can you go?
Okay, well that is part of the last section of the modification chapter, where we talk about, okay, whey protein is great, but heat it. If you heat the whey protein and pasteurize above a certain concentration, you're going to get precipitation over time, even with the golden child. So you can go up to 4.65% protein and have a 6 weeks of shelf-stable product. But then if you want to target 10% protein, you won't have more than 3 weeks shelf-stable product. Because a high concentration, a heated protein, that means a denatured protein, you have hydrophobic groups now, exposed, and they will eventually precipitate during storage, and that's a problem. So even whey protein needs modification to extend shelf life and have high concentration. But in comparison to other proteins, it's the best choice. Okay, so a muffin ingredient declaration lists sodium caseinate. Why was sodium caseinate used or chosen in a muffin? So muffin is, you don't expect to have sodium caseinate in there. You expect eggs, flour. It's an excellent emulsifier. So not calcium caseinate. You'll see that later on when we talk about casein, we can produce a calcium caseinate ingredient, but for different applications. Sodium caseinate specifically is an excellent emulsifier. It gives the emulsification needed and the viscosity needed for the muffin batter. See, I told you I'll show this slide multiple times. So we want to dissect this slide, so we're going to start with intrinsic factors. So here's where we're going to start our semester with looking at intrinsic factors that impact protein structure and gradually build upon the basic knowledge going to more complex information. I grade out protein source because that's a different section. We're going to take each source and go over the different sources. But what I'm going to talk about from now is the composition, the amino acid sequence, all of these intrinsic factors, and leave source out for now. So that's the first section of the course. Okay. So now we start. That was all just talk. Just introduction. Okay. We have 15 minutes to start. No. What time does the close? 45? 20 minutes. Okay. So, proteins. Such a complex. If somebody tells you starches, who's going to work on starch? Nobody in this class, so I can talk freely? Starch is simple compared to protein. So proteins are really complex, and because of their complexity, they give you so much to work with. So proteins differ in so many different aspects. If we look just at the intrinsic factors, so you have difference in amino acid composition and sequence. Not only composition, but sequence. Structural configuration, again conformation, because they differ in composition and sequence, and also they differ in molecular weight, because you might have a protein that is 14 kilodalton, that means 14,000 daltons, or you might have a protein that is 200 kilodalton. So they differ in size. I should have added size here, but you added, so they differ in size. Because they differ in composition and sequence, they're going to differ in structure, formation, configuration. Because they differ in composition, sequence, and structure, they're going to differ in interaction. Because the structure impacts interactions again. If you have a globular protein, that means something coiled closely around itself, that's globular protein, versus an open structure protein, they will have different interaction because the open structure will have more functional groups available for interaction than a globular closed structure. Chemical, biochemical properties, that is related to reactive groups, how they're going to form or interact based on the different functional groups they have. And so that is based on the hydrophobicity and net charge. So does the protein carry charge? Does it carry a negative charge? Does it carry a positive charge? What's the percentage of hydrophobicity on the surface and total? So all of these impact as well functionality. So all of these differences between one protein and the other will impact functionality, and that's why there's no two proteins from two different sources that functions the same. None. They're all different. Okay, now let's check. The pKa of the side chain, which is the R group, of the following amino acids is lower than 6. Take a wild guess, and then if you answer correctly, then you get to explain. Added bonus.
C?
What is E?
No, C.
Pick E or C?
C.
D?
Histidine.
Okay, you get to explain.
Is that right?
Well, regardless, you get to
Well,
explain.
I know that glycine and arginine are basic, and so they probably have.
And so is histidine.
Oh, just kidding. None of them.
None of them. They're all basic. That means their R group has an extra amine group, at least one extra amine group. And that makes them a basic amino acids. And basic amino acids have high pKa values, really basic pKa values. And just a refresher, what is a pKa?
Isn't that the point where it's H group or something comes out?
So the,
pH at which the conjugate base equals to the conjugate acid.
that is if you have a buffer, yes. So the pKa is more closely to what you said in terms of dissociation. Okay. So the dissociation dissociation coefficient of either the H group on the acid or the H group on the base. So the higher the pKa means that group doesn't want to give you its H. That means it's a basic group. So the amine group, which is the nitrogen NH3 or NH2, they don't want to give you their hydrogen unless the pH is really high. Then they'll say, okay, here, take it. Whereas the carboxyl group is an acid group, so it's readily giving you its H. It will have a very low dissociation. High dissociation. That means it's readily dissociated. Okay, so here, none of the above. This is just to emphasize that these 3 amino acids are basic. So because they're basic, the pKa of the side chain it should be basic. It won't be lower than 6. Okay, so this was an introduction to this section. All right, we start from the very beginning. This probably, you've done this before, you know it, but again, we're building the puzzle, so we have to go from the beginning, learn about these structures, especially the R group. This is really important because the R group is going to relate to structure, is going to relate to function. Okay, so amino acids, basic building blocks of proteins. So this is the main basic structure. So you have a chiral carbon, that means every bond is with a different group. So the alpha carbon, that means this is bonded to an hydrogen, this is bonded to an amine, this is with a carboxyl group, and this is the side chain, your alpha. So every bond is different, they call it chiral carbon. And the nature, it's an L configuration, means the amine group is on the left. So that is the naturally present amino acid with the configuration of the N group. At neutral pH or close to neutral pH, depending on the amino acid, you have the NH, the amine group is ionized. It has its hydrogen or the proton. The carboxyl group is ionized. It gives its proton. So net charge is 0 if the R group does not carry a charge. Okay, so we have the basic group, we have the acidic group. That what makes proteins buffers. They call the proteins natural buffers, excellent buffers. Why? Because they resist change in pH. When you titrate with an acid, guess what's going to happen? The acidic group is going to pick up hydrogen and the pH will not change. We have more students. Hi.
Sorry, I'm
can stay. I'm desperate. So when you titrate with the base, as you titrate with the base, finally this amine group is going to say, okay, take my hydrogen, and then the pH will not change. So that's why they are buffers.
Just a question, in the basic structure, does it have the H on the O also? Shouldn't it be like O minus or no?
Well, it's just the basic structure, but this is it. This is just showing you the structure, but it's dependent on the pH.
Oh, okay.
So in this case, it's never like that. It's just showing you here's the basic structure, but it really depends on the pH to tell you which one has a group ionized or not ionized based on the pH. That doesn't exist as is. There's no one pH that this doesn't have its hydrogen and this does have its hydrogen.
Yeah.
Now, this is a good call though, but this is just to show you the basic structure. Alright, so the R group, here's where I say this is the most important group of your amino acid, because this group, depending on what it consists of, it will determine polarity of the amino acid. Does it like water? Does it not like water? Is it a long hydrocarbon chain, or is it just an H group, or what is it? Hydrophobicity, do you have, is it a ring? Do you have a phenol group? What do you have here? Reactions and interactions, do you have an OH group? Do you have an SH group? Do you have an amine group? Do you have an additional carboxyl group? And because of the composition of this R group, this is what impacts the functionality of the protein. But before it impacts functionality, it impacts structure. And then when structure is impacted, functionality is impacted. Alright, so because structure is very important, we need to know the different amino acids. Because the different makeup of the amino acid is, everything in the class is based on the different makeup of amino acids. So we have to go through this. How painful it is, we have to go through it. Alright, but it will make sense to you once we go over and we go, I need to know this information because this will help me understand structure, build up better. Okay. So the amino acids are categorized into hydrophobic and hydrophilic amino acids. And under hydrophobic you have another subcategory which is aromatic and aliphatic. So aromatic means you have a ring structure. What is in this class?
I think it's confusing because this is one, or B25,
Yeah.
and then B35 is the next one down.
Ah.
So I'm sure people are like, oh,
You can't really see if there's people sitting in here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Alright, so aromatic, they are labeled as aromatic because they have a ring structure. And that ring structure that you have, here's a phenol group, here's just a benzene ring, and then here you have another form of aromatic structure. So what's unique about this is not only it's a hydrophobic structure, but also it's important in detection of proteins because these are the components or the amino acid in the protein that you will allow you to detect protein by monitoring UV absorption. So every protein has, to some extent, a certain amount of these amino acids. Every protein, but not all peptides, because when you break the proteins into sequences, not all sequences will have these. That's why when we monitor peptide absorbance, we always do 280 and 220, which is the wavelength at which peptides can absorb light. But anyway, here you have tryptophan and tyrosine. They are the most light absorption. They have the highest molar extinction. So tryptophan is the highest, so it's the one that is more sensitive to absorbing light, followed by tyrosine, and phenylalanine is the lowest. But anyway, as I said, all proteins have them to a certain extent. That's why all proteins can absorb light at 280. Another unique attribute here for tyrosine is the presence of OH group. You should put a sign on this door. Hello.
Hi. Sorry.
But this is entertainment. So this can, since you're not asking questions, I can pause, breathe, and welcome newcomers. Okay. So this is important because when we talk about solubility later at high pH, we're going to notice that some proteins really solubility increases at pH 8 or 9 above the acidic pH, and you go, why? Because some of these groups get ionized, and by ionized that means they lose their hydrogen and they become O minus. Then you will have an additional charge, more interaction with water. So when I show solubility curves later, I'm going to ask you, why at pH 9 we see higher solubility than pH 3? You're going to go all looking at me, huh? I'm going to remind you it's tyrosine. So, we'll see who can remember this fact. All right. Aliphatic. So aliphatic, that means you don't have any structure, so it's an open R group or open R chain, and they are hydrophobic. So you have alanine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, methionine. You think this is an aromatic, but it's not. So protein is a very unique structure. So, before I go into there, so I just want to point out methionine have a sulfur group here, which we'll talk about the role of this sulfur at a later time. But this, another is a chiral carbon right here. So this isoleucine not only have a chiral carbon here, it has another chiral carbon here. Chiral again means every bond is different. And this is also important in terms of the mobility and flexibility of the bonds, which will be important when we talk about structure. And finally, I want to come to proline here. It's a very unique amino acid. It's unique in a sense. Look at its amine group here versus the amine group here and in every other amino acid. It's a secondary amine. It's not a tertiary amine. What does a secondary amine mean? It means that the nitrogen has two bonds. So nitrogen here is bonded to this carbon and bonded to this carbon. So it's a secondary amine. A tertiary amine means that it can carry 3 protons and it's bond to 1 carbon, and it's the most reactive form of amines. So the tertiary amine is most reactive, secondary amine is less reactive. And this protein, look, this is the R chain. This is the most unique amino acid again. This is the R chain is linked to the amine group via covalent linkages. So the covalent linkage is the least flexible bond when we talk about flexibility of a peptide bond. And this protein is known as secondary structure breaker because it's so rigid. If you have a secondary structure as beta sheet or alpha helix, if you hit the protein in the sequence, then the structure is disrupted because it doesn't have the same flexibility because the R chain is bonded to the amine group. So it's very, very rigid amino acid. Doesn't have rotation, bond rotations. So this will pop up again when we talk about secondary structure, so that you want to remember this. Post-translational modification can occur, especially in collagen, a meat protein, where proline can be modified into hydroxyproline, and that happens in the cells. It's post-translation modification. So that is another amino acid that can be present in collagen, which is hydroxyproline. All right. Hydrophilic. So you have the charged and you have the non-charged. So the charged ones positively charged amino acid, negatively charged amino acid. So you need to remember those. So you need to remember that the basic amino acids are histidine, lysine, arginine. The acidic amino acids are glutamic acid and aspartic acid. The basic ones, they have an amine group that can be ionized in their R chain. So in addition to the terminal amine here, they have another amine group that can be ionized. But look at, so here histidine, this is a primary amine. Lysine is a tertiary amine. Arginine is a secondary amine. Why is that important? Okay, but before I tell you why it's important, again, there is hydroxylysine, the same as hydroxyproline, can also, post-translational modification, you can have an additional amino acid that is hydroxylysine. But what's unique about lysine, it's the most reactive amino acid in Maillard reaction. Why? Because it's the only amino acid that has two tertiary amines. So, because it has these two amines, ionizable amine group, then it's the most reactive amino acid of all the amino acids in the proteins. So what happens is when you have a reducing sugar and you have lysine, you have Maillard browning more readily than a protein low in lysine, and then you have nutritional loss in addition to browning because lysine is a essential amino acid. And I'm going to stop here. We'll continue next time. Okay.